All right, so juniors, we are about to tackle the next of our fireside poets. We're going to actually cover two today. We're going to cover William Cullen Bryant first, who I think is my favorite, mainly because of the poem we're going to read today. I absolutely really love the poem Thanatopsis. It's kind of dark, it's kind of depressing, but yet it's also kind of comforting. And that's the kind of stuff I love in poetry. I love poetry that's realistic, and I love stuff that makes you think, but I also love the poems that, when you're done can give you something to think about and to honestly, in a way feel better about, to be honest. I mean, and that's just what I think. Some of you may disagree. So let's talk a little bit about William Cullen Bryant. And I'm looking in your book just because those are the notes we've got right now from page 261. And your book points out that Bryant became a famous journalist. And remember, all these fireside poets had other jobs. They weren't just sitting around writing poems. The first writer to truly be able to make a living as purely a writer, I think, was going to probably be Emerson, who is at times linked to the fireside poets, but I don't consider him one of them. All right. So anyway, Bryant's a journalist. That's how he works. And it says Bryant used his position as an influential journalist to defend human rights and personal freedoms. He was an outspoken advocate of women's rights and a passionate foe of slavery. And that's one of the things we're going to see with writers as we get through the 18 into the 1900s, even in today, in the 2000s, in the 2000 teens and 2020s now. We're going to see writers really taking a forefront in the social justice issues. I know that's kind of a curse word to many of you today. It shouldn't be. I mean, we should always seek justice for social causes, and everyone should be treated fairly. So Bryant saw that, especially back in the 1800s, where you still got people being mad. Today, it's arguable, I know, with like who's being mistreated and who's not, but back then it wasn't. Slavery's still a thing for most of his life because he dies in 1878, and women still were being treated poorly. So obviously, this guy is kind of is one of the voices that spoke out against this. The other thing about him is he's really linked with kind of starting the Romantic movement. All five of these guys contributed, but he's kind of considered the flashpoint, the starting area. And let's read a little bit about that. It says Romanticism was an artistic and philosophical movement that stressed emotion over reason and celebrated individuality and the human imagination. So really, this is about the individual, the power of the individual, and more than just it focused on the beauty of nature, and it focused a lot less on realism, okay? Then it says, critical of science and the new industrial age, Romantic writers turned instead to nature as a source of spiritual comfort and guidance. So nature is always a big part of these, which we're going to see really quickly in this poem. So flip over to 262. Thanatopsis is a longer poem, all right? But we're going to also cover an Oliver Wendell Holmes poem, Old Ironsides, that's quite short. So it will make up for it. Thanatopsis is a mixture of two words. Now, your book says comes from the Greek, meaning a view or meditation on death. That's true, but it's because of the two pieces, opsis and thanatos, which go together. Thanatos being death, opsis being to see. So really this poem is about how we should view death. And I think that some of you may find this to be an interesting way to view death. I think some of you may actually not agree with him, which is okay, all right? I understand that too. This doesn't take a Christian worldview of death. Now, I do want to point that he's not being hostile towards Christianity in any way, shape, or form, but there is definitely a lack of the spiritual element to it, okay? But I feel like this can still coincide with spiritual beliefs. I think that this showing an earthly death does not necessarily take away, heaven afterwards. He isn't doing that, okay? In fact, in some ways, I think this goes really well with Christianity. All right. So let's start on page 262. We're going to read a little bit. We'll probably read a stanza and then I'll stop. So this first one's going to go all of page 262 and over to page 263. We'll stop on line 30. So I'm going to read the whole thing. And I will tell you right now, if you're doing this at home and you didn't have the benefit of doing this in class, it is hard to follow this poem when we just read it. But I will tell you that it's really not as complex as it may seem. All right. As to him who in the love of nature holds communion with her visible forms, she speaks a various language. For his gayer hours she has a voice of gladness, and a smile and eloquence of beauty, and she glides into his darker musings with a mild and healing sympathy that steals away their sharpness ere he is aware. When thoughts of that last bitter hour come like a blight over thy spirit, and sad images of the stern agony and shroud and pall, and breathless darkness and the narrow house make thee to shudder and grow sick at heart, go forth under the open sky and list to nature's teachings, whilst from all around, earth and her waters and the depths of air, comes a still voice. Yet a few days in thee the all-beholding sun shall see no more, in all his course, nor yet in the cold ground where thy pale form was laid with many tears, nor in the embrace of ocean shall exist thy image. Earth that nourished thee shall claim thy growth to be restored to earth again, and lost each human trace, surrendering up thine individual being, shalt thou go to mix forever with the elements, to be a brother to the insensible rock and to the sluggish clod, which the rude swain turns with his share and treads upon. The oak shall send his roots abroad and pierce thy mold. Okay, so let's talk about what's going on right here. We're linking nature and death, and you're in the background kind of gives you that. But we start out with him talking about the lessons nature, how nature impacts us. And again, remember, nature's a big part of romanticism, and I love that element of it. I love nature. I know I look like the kind of person who doesn't ever get off his couch, but I used to be an Appalachian Trail guide. I love we did that, and I did the northern part, the 100-mile wilderness, and I loved being outside. If I could live up there again in the Northeast, I would. Now, the nature down here to me is not quite as impressive. I mean, everything's flat. We've got beaches here, but that's it. And I miss mountains. So I get what he's saying here about when you're happy, how nature kind of magnifies that, but also when you're sad, that it has a way of making you feel better and kind of not erasing your sadness. And in a way, it even elevates that, but it kind of puts you in a different perspective. Now, it doesn't do that for everybody, I understand, but those of us who have a connection to nature, it really does. And I get that. That's why I love this poem. But now the second, like the last three quarters of it, and the first quarter kind of sets up what I just talked about. The last three quarters talk more about death and how we interact with nature. And it's a very naturey view of death, to be honest with you. In fact, like some of it's kind of tough to read. When he talks about how the oak shall send his roots and pierce thy mold, it's talking about like what happens physically when you're buried and you just, you go back to the earth, your body is anyway, okay? And just the way he presents it, it looks kind of invasive. It looks it looks painful in some ways. But I want to note that that's not what he's trying to do. Okay, so let's look at the next stanza. All right, he says, "Yet not to thine eternal resting place shalt thou retire alone, nor couldst thou wish couch more magnificent. Thou shalt lie down with patriarchs of the infant world, with kings, the powerful of the earth, the wise, the good, fair forms, and hoary seers of ages past, all in one mighty sepulchre." Now he points out here, and I said normally I was going to read each stanza, but these stanzas are kind of long. Pieces here. He talks about here that when you die, you're going to go through the same thing that great people have gone through before. This isn't unique. He said you're going to retire to the same place as the great men and women of the past, which that's true. Okay. Again, it's pointing to the universality of death, that this is just something that everyone goes through, and no great or small. And really, he's going to get to the point that there's nothing to fear, that this is something that we all go through, and that, bigger people than us have gone through it in the past, and that we can consider this joining into one large fraternity of people who have gone through the same experience, which is a really neat way to see death, thus the title. The hills, rock-ribbed and ancient as the sun, the vales stretching in pensive quietness between the venerable woods, rivers that move in majesty, and the complaining brooks that make the meadows green, and poured round all, old ocean's gray and melancholy waste, are but the solemn decorations all of the great tomb of man. Now, that part I love. It's the idea that all these beautiful parts of nature really are just a way to mark the tomb of man in general, because people are buried in the earth. And I think that's such a powerful message of how beautiful our tomb truly is. The golden sun, the planets, all the infinite host of heaven are shining on the sad abodes of death through the still lapse of ages. All that tread the globe are but a handful of the tribes that slumber in its bosom. Saying like everyone who's alive now, it adds up to nothing compared to all the people who rest in the earth and who have passed away. So again, there's many more people dead than are alive. Take the wings of morning, pierce the Barcan wilderness, or lose thyself in the continuous woods where rolls the Oregon, and hears no sound, save his own dashings, yet the dead are there, and millions in those solitudes, since first the flight of years began, have laid them down in their last sleep. The dead reign here alone. So shalt thou rest, and what if thou withdraw in silence from the living, and no friend take note of thy departure? All that breathes will share their destiny. So, what about one of the common things people fear about death? Sorry, my nose is itchy. One of the things that most people fear about death is the idea of being alone or no one missing you when you're gone. And he points out that while that may happen, eventually everyone on the planet is going to lie down and rest just like you did. And they'll be there with you eventually. It says, the gay will laugh when thou art gone. The solemn brood of care plod on, and each one is, as before, will chase his favorite phantom. Yet all these shall leave their mirth and their employments, and shall come and make their bed with thee. As the long train of ages glide away, the sons of men, the youth in life's green spring, and he who goes in the full strength of years, matron and maid, the speechless babe and the gray-headed man shall one by one be gathered to thy side by those who in their turn shall follow them. It's pointing out the cyclical nature of death. That young and old both die, and that the people that bury them will eventually die as well. And the way it works out is eventually we'll all be together there. Now, I realize there's a spiritual dimension of this that is not mentioned here. Of when we die, where some of us go to heaven, some go to hell. That concept, I realize that's not mentioned here, but that's not the point of this. So I don't want you to think that I'm not advocating for those things. Now, all of this really, and this is one of the great things about most poems that I really love, like this one, is everything we've read up until this point is kind of establishing your idea that there's no reason to fear death because we all go through it. But the last stanza here is just the power pack. I've got the whole thing highlighted because I think it's so powerful. I love it. It's one of my favorite lines in poetry. It says, "So live when thy summons comes to join the innumerable caravan which moves to that mysterious realm where each shall take his chamber in the silent halls of death. Thou go not like the quarry slave at night, scourged to his dungeon, but sustained and soothed by an unfaltering trust. Approach thy grave like one who wraps the drapery of his couch about him and lies down to pleasant dreams." Look at how he talks about how we should approach death, which is the point of the poem. That's the title. He says that death should be about, don't be frightened, don't be screaming and kicking and acting like you're terrified. Approach it like it's a peaceful rest. And I love that. He says, don't be like a slave being scourged, beat into going to a place. Go like you want to go. Now, he's not saying, hey, let's all go kill ourselves. So don't make that mistake. But what he is saying is not to be scared when the time comes. Now, I think this part holds up well with Christianity, for the record, okay? Because the idea is that's one of the things that bothers me. For Christians to be people who believe in the concept of an afterlife and people who, have put their faith in Jesus and believe they are going to heaven, why are people so terrified of death when the time comes? Now, I don't mean let's rush to it, but the fact is that, you believe that there's this beautiful, concept of heaven that you've got coming for you and you are scared of it. That makes no sense. So Bryant here, his attitude towards death or his tone towards death is really that it's not anything to be feared of. You can actually treat it as I love that description at the end, like somebody's about to wrap the drapery of his couch about him. In other words, you're laying down with a nice warm blanket on the couch and taking a pleasant nap. I mean, like I do when I get home from school half the time. Now, it's easy to look at this and see it as a dark poem and something that's like, encouraging death. It's not. What he's trying to do is encouraging people that this fear of death, which is the way most of us see death, as something scary, is to not treat it that way. To treat it more like, the ending of something great and the beginning of something even better, maybe, for those of us who believe in that. So I love it. I love the imagery. I love anything that involves nature. The older I get, the more that kind of resonates with me. So I think that's really cool. All right. Oliver Wendell Holmes. He is our third fireside poet. I believe tomorrow I'm going to give you another poem of his because this first one here is pretty simple, to be honest with you. We're going to read Old Ironsides, short poem and not much to deal with, okay? Now, like the rest of our people, Holmes had a job besides a writer. I believe he was a lecturer. I think he may have, let's see what it says here. He was a doctor, switched to medicine, studying at Harvard, and also for 2 years in Paris. He obtained his medical degree the same year he published his first collection of poetry. He was a doctor. He also does speak, though. He says known for his brilliant skills as a speaker, so he obviously went out and spoke. His son is more famous than he is. His son became a Supreme Court justice of the same name, Oliver Wendell Holmes, except he was the junior. This is the senior that we're reading. So the Old Ironsides poem found on page 267. Very short, very simple. When we talked about meter yesterday, this has a very simplistic meter, but it really fits the song. All right. So let's give you a little bit of background here. It says the battleship Constitution earned its nickname Old Ironsides for withstanding British attacks during the War of 1812. By 1830, having outworn its usefulness, the ship was slated for demolition. Holmes wrote this poem to protest this decision. The popular verse saved the ship and won Holmes' early fame as a poet. So this poem had impact. It changed policy. They were going to destroy this ship. And by the way, the poem sounds like he's advocating for the destruction of the ship. And we're going to talk about what he's actually saying versus what you may think. All right. This is where knowing the background helps. Okay. If I just read the poem to you, you would think that he's saying, hey, let's take this ship and sink it right now. It's not worth anything. That's not what he's saying. Okay. So let's read. We're going to read the whole thing. It's 24, 25 lines, but it's very simple. All Says, I tear her tattered ends and downs, long has it waved on high, and many an eye has danced to see that banner in the sky. Beneath it rung the battle shout and burst the cannon's roar. The meteor of the ocean air shall sweep the clouds no more. Her deck once red with heroes' blood, where knelt the vanquished foe, when winds were hurrying o'er the flood and waves were white below. No more shall feel the victor's tread, or know the conquered knee. The harpies of the shore shall pluck the eagle of the sea. Oh, better that her shattered hulk should sink beneath the wave. Her thunder shook the mighty deep, and there should be her grave. Nail to the mast her holy flag, set every threadbare sail, and give her to the god of storms, the lightning and the gale. And notice that is a very simple meter. It flows. It's very bouncy. It's very simplistic, but it's still good. I mean, it's a great poem as far as those parts, the rhythm and the rhyme. They're very simple, and I enjoy that. Not a lot of depth, though, is the thing. So what we've got here is it sounds like he's advocating for, hey, let's just take the thing out and sink her, and he is. But what he didn't want was for them to blow it up or tear it up to pieces. He felt like that was dishonoring the ship. So what he's advocating for here is to set her sails and just let her go out and sink on her own. Viking funeral here, just let her go with minus the fire. Okay, but what makes this poem great is not in the message, and that this is the rhythm and meter. This is one of those poems where that comes in, and of course, obviously, the idea impacted people because this poem led to the ship being saved, and I think that that's because it was very memorable. The meter's simple and it's easy to, it's catchy. Certain songs just have that catchy element to them that make it where they stick in your head. Even if you hate the song, it still sticks in your head. That's typically because of a riff or beat in it that sticks out, and this has that in the meter. That's the riff or the beat of the poem. So, and it really does sing a little bit. So, little question at the end that's kind of an interesting one to broach. It says, how is the subject matter of the poem in this grouping distinctly American? So far, what about Thanatopsis and Old Ironsides and the tide rises, the tide falls? What makes those uniquely an American poems? So you'll see that question again on your test, just a heads up. So be thinking about that as we get moving. So anything more with the Old Ironsides? Not really. Just looking at the images he has of just, allowing the ship to have dignity as it ends its life is it's kind of interesting. It's a neat poem. It's no way as witty as some of the ones we're going to see tomorrow, as well as it's not as deep as Thanatopsis, but it still has its value. You can see, though, with poems like Old Ironsides, how the fireside poets kind of have fallen out of favor with writers today. They still like to study them for the impact they've made, but it's like studying Sophocles, not Sophocles, Socrates. Sorry, Sophocles is a playwright. Socrates is the philosopher. A lot of this, and Aristotle as well, these old philosophers that kind of laid the groundwork for better things to come later. You don't take them as serious today. You may quote some of their stuff, but a lot of their philosophies have really, not aged well. But you still value them because of what came later because of them. And that's kind of like these poems, okay? Old Ironsides represents everything that's, I'd say, wrong. And I put that very lightly with the fireside poets, the very simplistic, bouncy rhythms that made it really easy to memorize, but there wasn't as much depth here. Now, again, I point out that Bryant's poem Thanatopsis definitely bucks that trend. All right. Well, I hope that gets you, some help with these. I know it wasn't a lot of analysis. Probably could have done better, but I think that's a good start. So tomorrow we're going to be out of the book. I'm gonna link you 3 poems that are not in your book that I want to study. 2 of the fireside poets we have not talked about: James Greenleaf Whittier and James Russell Lowell. And I think I've got another Holmes poem because I want to show you what he can do, because this is not the best representative of his work. So those will be in there tomorrow. I will send you a link to them on your OneNote, as well as the video that I'll complete tomorrow after school. So those of you who are going to be out, because I know I have a lot of kids out, make sure you go back and you view that video, and that if you have any questions, you send them to me, please. All right? Okay, I think that's it. I think the assignment for this week came from, it does come from today's. No, it's from yesterday. It's from the Song of Hiawatha for the honors kids. The regular classes, you have an assignment from Thanatopsis. I'll proceed after this to give you that. You should have already been given that. Those of you learning at home, there will be a handout that shows you how to break up poems into smaller chunks. Then we're going to use Thanatopsis for that, because that's how you understand that poem is taking it in small chunks. All right? Okay, guys. Well, I hope this was helpful, and I hope to see you again very soon.